Welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. You're listening to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. More women than ever are faced with challenging decisions on a regular basis. I am so privileged to sit down with them to discuss exactly what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, realizing their wildest dreams. I'm sure you'll be able to relate. And don't forget to stay to the end to take advantage of my latest free gift. Let's get started. Welcome to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, and as always, we're here talking about decisions that have been made in our lives that were courageous or impactful or changed the course of our life, or even one that we wish we could go back on. Today, I have Kelsey as my guest. Amber and I go way back. Amber, I like to think you were one of my very first guinea pigs with my decision system. I really want to thank you for indulging me all these years and also for joining me today.
Of course. Great to be here.
So before we get started, I want to remind all of our listeners that I ask all my guests what their most favorite app is on their phone outside of social media. So you'll want to stay to the end to hear what Amber has to say is her favorite app, because we get some great suggestions. And also you'll want to stay to the end to get access to my latest freebie. Okay, Amber, I think we're going to do things a little bit differently today, just because of our history. So I want to reminisce a little bit, because you've been along for this ride for many, many years. And, we were talking about the development of my 5-step decision Smith system. And you recalled that, one of the first decisions we made together, we were using pen and paper.
Yeah.
So, talk to me a little bit about your perspective on what, the past 10, 15 years have been in terms of our decision making together.
Yeah, I think we're 13 or 14 years now. And the very first time, pen and paper. I think you'd drawn some lines and scribbled, and I was like, what is this magic? It just makes so much sense. But yeah, and I think that goes back. I was debating packing up and moving to work on cruise ships, and it all worked out for the best. But yeah, I believe that was probably our first one.
Wow. So I remember when I first, used to walk through that system with a paper and pen and a calculator. And then we progressed to an Excel spreadsheet, right? Yep. And I had all my algorithms built in behind, working their magic behind the scenes. And then
probably still have it in my inbox somewhere.
I'm sure you do. I know I have copies floating around here and there. And then I went to an online version. So you could go to a website and type in your information. And, you could still save that home screen on your phone. So it kind of was a pretend app, because when you pressed it, it went to the web page. And then, do you know that it's been almost 5 years that my app's been available in iTunes and Google Play? I can't believe it's been that long. So for those of you out there that aren't familiar, my app is called the Decision Smith, and it's really a simple walkthrough, walking you through the 5 steps of the 5-step Decision Smith system that ultimately gives you a mathematical score and a percentage that points you in the right direction when you're making decisions. So, Amber, remind me of some of the decisions that we've made together using this system.
There have been so many. I think some of the big ones that stand out, like I said, moving on to cruise ships and then coming home from ships, debating, after 3 years, am I going to go out on another contract and, or am I going to move to Calgary, or am I staying home? And that was one that I really thought I was 50-50 or 33.333 on all ends. Right. And I remember getting the score back and it being just this resounding, you got to go to Calgary. And I was like, oh, like that. I think that was probably one of the bigger impact ones, to see the difference between no, I'm just so torn. And then it was like, no, you're actually not torn. So right. That was a big one. I've used it for things as small as like, well, not small, but like where to go on vacation, or, hiring needs, which I'm sure we'll get to, places to move, used it a lot. And then I've used it with my team as well. When I had my team, they had big decisions, what school to go to, etc. So it was a tool that I've definitely championed over the years.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate it for sure. Today there was one decision that we talked about, and this is one of my favorite stories. So it's not a surprise to me, the decision that Amber is going to share with me today, when usually it is. But it's one I think that really had you almost questioning the validity of the results, right? And acknowledging that there's no way you would have come to that decision without using the system. Fair to say that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of my previous aha moments with it were, like I said, either feeling torn and then seeing a clear view, or not being able to come to a decision and you saying back to the drawing board. But this was the first time where it picked something that I just was like, that was my least favorite option.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I've had decisions that I've plugged into the app and they've given me results, and I've like thrown my phone on the bed and said, this sucks. Like, what are you telling me? But I've followed the recommendations and it's worked out, more fabulously than I could have ever imagined. So it does work. And I love that there have been those surprises for you. Before we go to the decision that we were going to talk about, I want to go back to the one where you were trying to decide where to live in the States.
Yeah.
Because how many options had you considered at that point in time?
We had a lot. We were looking at moving to Austin, New York, Chicago, Denver, and I can't remember, there was one more, but there were 5 US cities that my ex-husband and I were deciding to move to.
Mm-hmm.
Plot twist.
And I remember those conversations because you input all the required information into the app, and none of those locations met even a baseline threshold that you needed, right? So, and I think that surprised you.
It did. I thought for sure I wanted to be in Chicago.
Mm-hmm. And we love Chicago, right?
Yeah, we do.
Wasn't the right thing to satisfy all of the factors that you and your ex-husband were taking into consideration at the time. Yeah. So, that was a situation where you were essentially forced to go back to the drawing board, right?
Yeah. Make some bigger decisions. Dun, dun, dun. It's a woman's podcast, right?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I think what really makes me happy is that you were so sure that this process works that you listened. You didn't just decide to choose one of those so-so options. You chose to acknowledge that none of those cities met the requirements that you were looking for. And because it wasn't, I have to move next month kind of situation, you had lots of time to plan. You were able to go back to the drawing board and, review places that you had maybe overlooked in the past, and consider other options.
Yeah.
We all know that now that didn't have to come to pass because different decisions were made in your life. But at the same time, could you imagine if you'd moved to one of those places? And anyway.
Well, and I think I just had known and seen such drastic results previously to have so many low scores. I just really was able to go, no, like I can't make a decision with it being this low. So either I don't have enough information, or I'm working on the wrong decision, So that trust in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So let's get to the decision that we were going to talk about today. So I want you to set the stage for us and just really, take it step by step. So, with regard to this decision that you've so graciously offered to share with us, tell me a little bit about the background and, where you were living, where you were working, what was going on in your life. Start there.
This one was when I was living in Calgary, and I was working for a fairly large Canadian fitness company. And I was the general manager, and I had recently taken over a new club that was struggling. It was dingy, dumpy, hadn't hit numbers in forever. And I was up for the challenge, right? So I went in, and the culture wasn't great. And I felt like we had started to make some really good strides culture-wise, and kind of got some fresh blood in there, and some new people, some fresh faces. And unfortunately, right when I was kind of felt like things were starting to pick up, I'd made some new hires to the sales team. I had gotten, obviously, the word that my mom had passed away. And I left for about 2 months to come back to Ontario to be with my dad and brother. And when I returned, a good chunk of the team was gone. So some of that sales team that I'd been working with had made other decisions. My assistant manager at the time was feeling like it wasn't the right fit for her and was wanting to make a move. And so it felt really back to the drawing board. And so I was hiring an assistant manager who was a sales manager. And I had 3 options. And the first option, my favorite option, was a good friend of mine. He used to be a fitness manager there. He's very good at sales, very successful, knew the members, knew the team. He was like one of my good buddies, competitive like I was. And I was like, this is it. This is my guy. He had left the company a few years ago, a little bit disgruntled, but it kind of was like, no, I've been out there, I've seen other things, I've done other things, ready to come back. And my one of the leaders was very against him coming back. That was actually probably the thing that made me have to step back, because I was like, let's go. And then the other one was a candidate that she had interviewed for a different club, really liked him, great sales background, good looking guy, kind of had the charisma. And I was like, whatever. I was really, really going for my guy. And then in the final hours, we had, can I say his name? Am I allowed to say his name?
You can, I have no problem with it.
Boris comes in for an interview, and he is just this larger than life. He's from France. I can't remember where, somewhere in France. And he's got a bit of a sales background, but more so operations, bars and restaurants, very charismatic, very funny. But in my head, I had already had my decision made. And my divisional manager at the time really, really did like him as well. We both were like, he's great. Do we have another role for him? But I wanted a shark. And sure enough, I went into the app, and I spent a lot of time really putting a lot of thought into what my parameters were, what were the things that were important to me, and what were the things. And the number one thing was the culture. That sales experience and everything was important, but it wasn't as important as having a cohesive culture and having that partner. Not that I don't think I would have necessarily gotten those things from my first choice, but with the background of having left, not, saying ready to come back, but you never know when somebody leaves and comes back.
Right.
That was a factor that was really important to me, and his energy just blew it out of the water. But I remember thinking putting all 3 side by side before in the app, going well, that's his personality is great, but he doesn't have
right.
But we know, when you're putting in those factors and you're rating those factors, you're rating your options, it can be surprising. So when he showed up at the top of my list, I was like, no, No, like I'll maybe a sales guy. Let's bring him in. Let's have him do some sales, get his feet
So
wet.
just so our listeners know, so Boris showed up at the top of your list.
Or showed up at
Boris
the top of
without
my
the
list.
sales experience, yes.
Yeah, least amount of sales, like some sales experience, but least amount out of the other two. And yeah, so I liked him, but it wasn't my first pick. And yeah, so we went forward with it, and I was like, I really hope this goes over well, because of my two leaders both were strongly pulling for the other two, and I was strongly pulling for the other. So I did it. We went with him.
Wow. So essentially you had your front runner, you had your divisional's front runner, and then you had this kind of nobody that was coming from behind a little bit.
Yeah.
But the other two horses were still leading the pack.
Yeah.
And then you threw the app at the candidates,
Yeah.
not physically, but and
Our days.
and the the person who was in the back catapulted to the front. So before we talk a little bit about that and the everything that happened after that, I just want to explain to our listeners a little bit about the process, because not everybody might know exactly what we do. So essentially, from a step perspective, the first thing we do is we make sure we know what decision we have to make in front of us. And the next thing we do is we look at what our options are. And in your case, you had those three candidates, right? The third step is looking at the factors that you're taking into consideration. And that's where you talked about the parameters and all those things that you are taking into account as you make that decision. So for you, like you said, it was somebody that fit the culture or would exude the culture that you were looking for, the sales and that type of thing. Just a list without any weight against it, because the fourth step is where you actually rate those factors and determine which is most important to you at this point in time. And for you, like you said, culture at that point was more important. Sales was important, but culture was the most important. So it was rated the highest. And then obviously, the fifth step of the system is to score the options against the factors. And that's where you get the final mathematical score and percentage that you were alluding to when, it showed you that Boris was the best choice.
And he was.
So tell me about that. So you went ahead and convinced your divisional that it was.
Yeah, that came down to it's my club. I need to be trusted as a leader to make the good decisions, the bad decisions, all
And you're in your head going, Dana, don't fail me now.
Like, come on. But yeah, no, went back to it, and my immediate supervisor was very supportive. Her boss was supportive, but also was like, okay, Amber, like, you make your bed. I think her candidate we actually had convinced to come on as a sales manager, kind of in training, saying like, hey, we're predicting a position to come up shortly. And I think 2 or 3 weeks in, he quit because he didn't like it, and he didn't like the sales grind of it. Yeah, it was it tasted so sweet.
Wow.
Yeah, so he was gone. And yeah, so brought in Boris, and he just, I know I tend to be dramatic sometimes, but I'm genuinely saying I feel like he just took the company by storm. So he came in and was absolutely my like partner in crime as far as like that trust level, being able to divide and conquer the tasks. His strengths were my opportunities were his strengths. And we won the most awards that year that any other club had won. It was just so many successes. I could go on and on about the successes, but I think even more for me personally, more importantly than that, he became a great friend, one of my best friends. So it was just that win-win in every category. And he really kind of came in at a time where, normally I'm totally like, I'm happy to carry the culture on my own. It's what I love to do, but it was really at a time in my life where I needed that. I needed somebody else to be able to kind of step in and pick up those days where I just, wasn't as, and he, I mean, he nailed it. So
That's awesome. I love that story. Just that it was such an unexpected
it really was.
win, and not something right without the app that you would have chosen otherwise.
Not at all. And, I think it's so interesting because I think hiring a lot of times, I think this is really relevant right now because a lot of people are struggling to hire and to fill those roles. And so we can get into this like desperation mode of hiring. And that is your like, we know we're HR backgrounds, like the cost, let alone the time, the frustration, and knowing the power of having the right people in the right place. A tool like that, we should be using it on those big decisions.
Right. I think one of the things that I need to call out, and kudos to you, is that you took the time and invested the time in ensuring that you listed all of your factors and you really dug deep and understood what the needs were in the club. Because you can, create a great list, but if it doesn't mirror your current needs, regardless of the decision you're making, it's a waste of time. So I think over the years learned how important that step number 3 was. To me, it's the most important step of the whole process. And I know you always take that extremely seriously. And I think that's what allows you to get the great results that you do using the system, because I don't think you've made very many bad decisions since we met.
None of the big ones. I'm really good at big decisions now.
Right. It's some of the smaller ones that you don't use the app for.
It is.
Still in question.
Yeah. But I've learned the hard way. Like I love to learn things the hard way. It's just part of my charm, I guess. But I just learned I can spend the time now, or I will spend the time and finances on the other side of it, right? So
there's the saying, do it right the first time, unless you've got all the time in the world to do it again. And I feel like that applies to making tough decisions. If you don't make the right decision the first time, you could spend years, making up for a bad decision. So, I love that you've wholly embraced making decisions using this system, and you've never faltered. So thank you for that. Because
thank you. Boris thanks you too.
Does he? Hey, I'm curious to know, do you know whatever happened to your first candidate?
Yeah, he's actually still with the company. No, I'm lying to you. He was with the company for a while. He went back to the fitness manager role. And then he's in the fitness industry at a different location. But he actually, fun fact, just last weekend married my old boss. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And they're still great friends of mine to this day.
Oh, crazy story. That's great.
I still think he would have been fantastic, but
yes.
But it worked out for the best.
It sounds like it for sure. So, Amber, I don't think this will be the last time we talk. I, love hearing about your decision-making journeys, and, every time we talk about a decision that you've made, even though I've helped people make hundreds of different decisions, you somehow always bring a new perspective that I have not previously considered. So I think that's why I enjoy this type of conversation with you so much. So, if you're willing, I'd love to have you back at some point so we can talk about some more decisions.
Absolutely.
So, one final question that I promised I'd ask at the beginning, and that's about what your most favorite app is on your phone. So I said no social media. And I know everybody's favorite app is the Decision Smith, so you can't say that. So outside of those, what would your favorite app be?
Yeah, I would say, since I can't say the decision-making app, my favorite currently is Way of Life, and it is a habit tracker. So you can put in just your different, it's really simple. It's really easy. You put in the things you want to track, and then daily you just go in and click yes or no or skip. But I can't stand notifications on my phone. And so it's there until you click it off. So there have been many times where it's like, I got 25 calories left to go and I can't click it off. So I'm just doing jumping jacks around my living room, or chugging water or whatever it is that I'm on.
I was going to ask you for some examples of things that you would track.
No spend is one I sometimes do. Dance my heart out is a really important one. I find that's like my biggest, if I can just like dance my heart out to one song a day, that's a mindset, mental health game changer for anything.
For sure. Awesome. Great. So Amber, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with me today and all of your stories, because we had a few. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. If you're ready to realize your wildest dreams, come and join us in the Wildly Courageous Women Facebook group, where we're changing people's lives one brave decision at a time. I'm Dana Peever. Until next time, make great decisions and do life fun. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wildly Courageous Women. Keep listening to hear more stories of these incredible women realizing their wildest dreams. If you have a story to tell about a decision that you've made that has impacted your life, I'd love to feature you as a guest. Please get in touch. And don't forget to grab my latest gift by clicking below. I'm Dana Peever. As always, make great decisions and do life fun.